Hello there.
Well, I've been enjoying the Zibo 737-800X for a while, and one of the things I like to do is set up my own approaches on it. But when I went to enter a user waypoint using latitude and longitude in the flight management computer, I found there was very little information on the internet about how to do that on the Zibo. But I eventually found some and I figured it out. And so I'll give you that information, and I will also enter some other types of user waypoints so that you can create your own approaches and enjoy this simulator even more. But first, we're going to have to motivate ourselves to do this. And to do that, I'm going to go to an airport called VILH. When you do that, you'll come to an airport here called LEH, which is VILH, and it's marked as a helipad. And this is part of the problem with this airport, is it's not very well documented. There's no published approaches. Although you can find some approaches on the internet, you're going to have to enter it yourself. And that's what we're going to do. It's also set in the high mountains, so the terrain is difficult and the approach is also difficult. So let's take a look at this airport. So it has one main runway, 7L, and this is the only direction in which you can land. And that's what we're going to do. You have to be careful not to pick 7 or 6, which are small runways for helicopters. So we'll position ourselves on the 7L runway and take a look at the terrain before we get started. So here we are with the airplane right here positioned on runway 7L, at the start of runway 7L, which would be about where we want to land, which would be right there. And the other two runways are right here, very short. There's no way you would try landing on them unless you were attempting this in 100, 120 knot headwind or something. So this is how the runway looks. And what we're going to do is we'll have a last waypoint, which will be the runway itself. And then we're going to take a 1 mile runway extension with a 3-degree glide slope. And that'll be another waypoint right here. And if we have our altimeter setting right, we should be able to do a nice glide slope. The Autopilot should be able to do a nice glide slope all the way into the runway. Now this here is the Indus River, and we'll use that as a reference when we take a look at the approach. So you can see there are high mountains all around this airport. I'll zoom out a bit and you can see that. Now I come in closer, and there's a VOR across the river to the south of this airport, and that's roughly the southerly direction. You would come in over this VOR and right over the end of the runway, so the other end of the runway there. So from the VOR to the other end of the runway, then descend over these two ridges, turn, keep descending, and then catch that waypoint with the 3-degree glide slope 1 mile out from the runway, and then onto the runway itself for a landing. Now there's a lot of things that we have to do to get this right, so let's take a look at the approach. So here's an approach that I found on the internet. It's of course unofficial, and it's unpublished, and you won't find it by default in your navigation database in the Zibo, at least not the version that I have. I've put a link to it down below so you can take a look if you'd like. But we were talking about an approach, and here you can see the VOR, and there's the runway. And the landing direction is always 7, so that's 70 degrees, so that would be right there. So as I said in the earlier graphic, there's a VOR south of the airport. You come in from the VOR over the end of the runway, then turn and descend over these two ridges, swing all the way around, following these waypoints, and then we'll intercept the 3-degree glide slope, which will also be set up as an additional user waypoint, which will be somewhere here, and you're into the runway. So there are various waypoints that this diagram is giving us, and let's see the information that it gives. It gives a suggested name for the waypoint, which is LH03. It tells you the altitude at which you should be when you're flying this waypoint, so we'll have to set that into the flight management computer. And it gives you the latitude. Here it's north 34 degrees, 8.4 minutes, and east 77 degrees and 33.6 minutes. So this is the user waypoint that we'll have to plug into the flight management computer for the L803 waypoint. Now, if you look elsewhere in this document, you'll see other waypoints. For instance, it tells you that aircraft arriving in Tulay must follow the route below to land at runway 07. And it tells you that Lilacs, this is a defined waypoint. You'll find this in the database. And then you follow these user waypoints to the VOR, which is LLH. And then you continue until you get to LH06, and then it'll intercept the glide slope waypoint and onto the runway. In order to be able to do all your departures, landings, missed approaches, you will need to enter this set of 10 waypoints into the FMC. So let's take a look at how we can do all this. The easy way to enter waypoints, user-defined waypoints by latitude and longitude. We go into SIMBRIEF. If you don't have a free account at simbrief.com, you may want to think about getting one. But if you don't have a SIMBRIEF account, just use the fast forward to slide ahead to the next section, where I'll enter waypoints assuming that you don't have a SIMBRIEF account. But here we're going to go into SIMBRIEF, click on New Flight here, and we'll enter a departure of VIDP. We'll enter a departure of VIDP, which is where I'll be flying from, to VILH. We'll be flying right away. Notice that I use pounds here instead of kilograms. For the airframe type, for the Zibo is a 737-800, which is right there, so I'll select that. I use a cost index of 14, right there. And when we come in here, we'll check to see that it has the runway set up right. So the departure runway is 9, but the arrival runway has to be 7L in fact, because you cannot use 25 for landing at VILH. Now we come down to this all-important section, and here we see that it's recommending a route with waypoints already entered in latitude and longitude format. See, for example, this one here says 3319 N07802E. So is the next one. So let's compare that with the information we had on that other website. So when I look at this one here, 3319 north and 07802 east, that lines up exactly with the LH01, which was defined on the other website. Now here we come to the next one, which is 3400 north and 07739 east. That lines up with the LH02, except that it does not have the last digit. The actual waypoint given is 07739.9 east. So SIMBRIEF is not giving you the most accurate web points, but it is giving you something that you can get started with. The next one, LLH, is the VOR. This will be the point above the end of the runway, and then we're swinging around over those two ridges. So in fact, I will go up here, click on Generate OFP to generate the new flight plan. And we'll see how it looks on the map. Here's VIDP. We're flying north to VILH. And indeed, when you look at the approach, we are starting out at LELAX, which is LELAX. Then we come into LH01. This next waypoint is our top of descent here. That brings us to LH02, then the LLH VOR. So let me double check that. Yes. And that takes us over the end of the runway, and then we swing all the way around and come and land on runway 7 in this direction, going to the north, going to the east of northeast. So this looks about right. and I will download this and enter it into the flight management computer on the Zibo and see how that looks. So here we are inside the Zibo 737-800. While the aircraft is initializing, we'll set up the flight management computer. We're taking off from VIDP. Oh, that was already there. On the scratch pad, that goes in here. Our destination is VILH. And the flight plan that we just downloaded from SIMBRIEF is VIDP VILH 01. That goes in there, and I'll activate it. Now we'll take a quick look here on the Zibo tablet. Start my flight leg. My payload is fuel 16272, which I got from the flight plan at SIMBRIEF. Sorry, the fuel is 16272 pounds, and the payload is a hefty payload of 40,500 pounds, which I also got from SIMBRIEF. I can see from the diagram here that the fuel extends into the left and right wing tags, but there's none in the center. And we have our flight altitude set here. For the pressurization computer, we've told it we'll be flying up, cruising at 33,000 and landing around 10,900 feet. And right on the MCP here, I have 33,000 entered as the altitude for the aircraft to climb to. Now returning to the flight management computer here. Let me finish the performance initialization. I'm going to mark down 1,500 pounds of reserve fuel, a cost index of 14, and a flight level of 330. I'll just plug in something close enough for the top of climb OAT, 0 degrees Fahrenheit, and I know the transition altitude is 18,000 feet, and I'll execute that. Let me finish off my N1 limit here. I'll be taking off and climbing at the maximum possible settings. Taking off with 5 degrees of flap. It's asking for 4.75 degrees of trim, which I will set right now.
Welcome aboard. As you find your seat, please stow your larger carry-on luggage in the overhead bin and place any smaller items under the seat in front of you. We suggest stowing your rollerboards on this aircraft with the handle in first, wheels out.
That looks like a little too much. That looks about right, 4.75. That done, I'll pick off the V1, V-rotate, and V2 right here. That's 149, so I add 15 to that and enter it into the IAS setting here. That would be 154. Okay, that's done. Now returning to the flight management computer, let's look at my route of flight. This was taken from SIMBRIEF. Here's LILACs. Then those user waypoints that were entered in SIMBRIEF in latitude-longitude format are given here as FIX01, FIX02. They've been automatically named. And then there's the LLH VOR, and we come down to FIX06. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to enter the LH01 waypoint manually here and see how that lines up with FIX01. It should be pretty close, but if you recall from SIMBRIEF, it was missing the last digit after the decimal point on the minutes. So there's some inaccuracy here in the way the waypoint was entered on SIMBRIEF. So now we're going to enter the waypoint as it was shown on that sheet for LH01. And to do that, you go to I start over at the menu, go into the flight management computer here, pick off index. Once you get into index, your choice on the top right is navigation data, nav data. Click on that. And I'm going to enter a new waypoint, which I'm going to call, yes, LH01. So here it is on the scratch pad. I want to put it in here, so I'll click there. Having done that, I go back to LH01 and click again here. Now it gives me a way to enter latitude and longitude. And here's what I'm going to do. The latitude is going to be entered with 2 digits for degrees. And that's because latitude only runs from 0 to 90, so it doesn't need more than 2 digits. But before I do that, I need to tell it if it's north or if it's south. So in order to enter the latitude, we'll enter first whether it's north or south, so that's an N. And then we'll enter the degrees as 33, followed by the minutes of 19.0. There's no gaps or anything here, and we'll just plug that in. And see, it's gone in as north, 33 degrees north, 19.0 minutes. Next, we'll enter the longitude as east or west, but here it's east. And then it's 3 digits always, because longitude runs from 000 to nearly 180. Okay, east or west. So the east for this waypoint is 078, and then the minutes is 02.0, and that goes in right there. And that's the LH01 waypoint. North 33 degrees, 19.0 minutes, and east 78 degrees, 02.0 minutes. I'll exec that. Now we'll go to our flight plan, and we'll try to enter that waypoint right above FIX01 and see what the difference is. LH01 was the name of our new waypoint. We click here next to FIX01 to enter it right above FIX01, and we see a discontinuity. So we'll go into the next page, click on FIX01, come back to the previous page and enter it next to the discontinuity. And here we see that the difference is shown as 0, but we know that the last digit was not shown on SIMBRIEF, so the LH01 we've entered here is probably more accurate. So what I'm going to do is click delete and take out FIX01. Right, we have another discontinuity. We'll fix that with FIX02, and we'll hit exec. Now we'll note one problem here. We'll come back to it later. But let's look at FIX02, which is supposed to be LH02. So just for practice here, I'm going to enter a new waypoint, LH02, using the latitude and longitude again. So I'll go back to the menu, click on FMC. I got my index, nav data, and I'm going to enter a new waypoint here, LH02. Right there. And now I click again on LH02 and I can enter the latitude and longitude. For LH02 it's shown as north 34 degrees and 00 minutes. And the longitude is shown as east 077 and 39.9 right there. That done, I hit exec, I go back to my legs, and right above FIX02 I'm going to enter LH02. So I'll go down here, take FIX02 and put it up here. Go back to the previous page, I see LH02 right there. Then a distance of 0.7 nautical miles to FIX02. So that was quite far off, the one that's entered through SIMBRIEF. And in fact, I'm concerned, and I'm going to go back to the database and check it. But for now, I'm going to delete FIX02 right there. The next waypoint is the LLH VOR. And let me go back and check the LH02 waypoint to make sure I entered it correctly. Here's LH02, click there. It's come onto the scratch pad. I'll go back to the menu, FMC, go back to the index, and this time I'll click on navigation data, and instead of clicking here, because I'm not entering it as a new waypoint, I'm going to take this LH02 and put it into the waypoint identifier location here. And once I've done that, I've got LH02 on there, I'll go into nav options, I'll click there, and now I can check my latitude and longitude. It's 34.0, that's entered correctly, and E 07739.9, that's entered correctly too. So I'm confident that I have this right, and it's a better waypoint than the fix 02 that was entered earlier. So I'm going to go ahead and correct all these other waypoints, and then I'll come back and enter the runway waypoints, the user waypoints. So I'm back here. I entered the user waypoints LH01 through LH06. We can see them here, LH01, 2. I'm going to go to the next page. Here's the LLH VOR, then we go to 3, 4, and 5, and then 6, and then we'll head into the runway. The first waypoint will be the user waypoint I set with a glide slope, and then it'll be the runway threshold. Now, every time I entered these waypoints, I saw differences of up to 0.7 nautical miles again with the ones that were entered from SIMBRIEF, because SIMBRIEF doesn't have the digit after the decimal point on the minutes. So I'm going to go with these. I believe they're more accurate. And so for an airport like this, I would not recommend using SIMBRIEF waypoints unless you figure out a way to get the additional digit for the minutes on there. So in this section, we're going to enter the runway waypoints. So we're back here, and I'm going to go to the departure arrival page. And that's our departure is VIDP. We are interested in the arrival at VILH, so I'll click here next to the VILH arrival. And now we have to be very careful because 07, which is the right direction, is actually the helicopter runway, which is just a few feet long. So we need to pick 07L for the landing runway. That done, I'm going to create a waypoint with a runway extension with a glide slope. So I enter 1.0, which I believe is the least nautical miles out you can be from the runway, and a glide slope of 3 degrees. When I hit exec and I go back to my legs, this is the initial flight path, goes through LLH06, and on the next page we see 2 waypoints. I'm going to close off these discontinuities here and hit exec. And we see that the last waypoint is the runway itself, RW07L, which has a landing altitude of 10,682 feet. So we can expect a lot of alarms from the cabin pressurization system when we are landing there. Before that, 1.0 nautical miles before that, on a glide slope of 3 degrees, is this runway extension, which is a user waypoint that we just set up. The RX, X is for extension, 07L, is at 11,000 feet, and then the landing will be at 10,682. So before that extension, the waypoint will be LH06. Now let's look if we have our flight direction right. So we're coming in from VIDP. We'll come to Lilacs and head on 18 degrees will be our heading. LH01 will be heading 334, 317, 343, 304. Then we're starting to turn to the west and south. So that's 207, and then 124, we're turning to the east. LH06, and then we should be on the runway heading after LH06, which is 64. We intercept the runway extension waypoint for the 3-degree glide slope, and that's a heading of 68 right down to the runway. So there's not much difference between 64 and 68, so we have our direction right. Now let's look at the altitudes that we have here. If we go back to that document that gave us the unofficial approach, that had not only the latitude and longitude for these various waypoints, LH01 through LH06, it also tells us the altitude at which we have to be at these various waypoints. So here we are now. We're going to take a look at the plan view, for which we go in here, change to a plan view, and see whether this flight plan looks right. So let's zoom in a bit here. And we'll step through the flight plan. I have it on the legs view here. It's centered on the first waypoint after the runway, actually 88 nautical miles out of the runway, departure runway. We proceed. Lilacs is the first important point for the approach. Then we reach LH01, LH02, then we have a deceleration point. LLH is the VOR. Let me expand the view here. So now we're at the VOR south of the airport. Then the next waypoint would be the end of the runway which we're landing on, which is LH07. So we'll be right over the end of that runway. That's the runway 25 end. And then we go round, swing around LH04, LH05, LH06. And then here's the runway extension, 1 nautical mile out, catch the 3-degree glide slope, and come on into the runway. So this looks perfectly all right. So what we'll do now is we'll create some waypoints, some which are necessary and some which are not, just to illustrate how to create some waypoints. So the first one I'm going to do is a waypoint out between the runway, departure runway, which is going to be runway 09. We're not going to use a SIB. And now we'll see how the legs look. 10 degrees, 88 nautical miles, and there's nothing being shown for the runway. So what we'll do is I'm going to set up a waypoint about 40 nautical miles before SP, just because I can. So let's do that here. So we're going to pick up we'll click on SP here, and we're going to go minus 40 nautical miles. So this means along the flight path, the slash, minus means before the SP, and always 2 digits, nautical miles, 40 here. And I'm going to put that before SP, so I'll click on it here. And now I've got a new waypoint which is called SP01. I'll join it up with SP and hit exec. And you can see there's exactly 40 nautical miles between SP01 and SP, and the direction remains the same, which is 10. So SP01 is now an along track waypoint that we've set before SP. So that's one kind of user waypoint that we can set. Now we're going to set a waypoint after a given waypoint. So what we'll do here is between LH02 and LLH, I'm going to set up a waypoint. Here's LLH, and I want to set up a waypoint after LH02. So I'll click on the LH02 here, and I'm going to go about 2 nautical miles out. So that'll be a slash 02. There's no plus sign here, but it's the LH02 waypoint, a long track, and 2 nautical miles further. And I'm going to put that right before LLH. Right there. Now I'll join up LLH with that. And when I do an exec here, I see LH02, and exactly 2 nautical miles out is this new waypoint LH001, which goes to LLH. And the direction is 317. Now I want to make sure that my altitudes are correct, because SIMBRIEF, the flight plan did not set up altitudes. These are given from the VNAV setting. So the first altitude that needs to be correct is we need to be at flight level 230 or above at LH01. We are. We'll be at 30,000 feet. That's fine. At LH02, we need to be at 16,000 feet. And we're low there, so I'll set slash 16,000, and that goes on the right here to override the 15610. That's done. And there's the VNAV back in action. We need to be at LLH, the altitude is not specified, but we need to be at 14,500 at LH03, and we're way too low there, so that's slash 14500 at L803. So we come to the right here to override 13750, and we're set. And the VNAV's recomputed the intermediate altitudes here, which are shown in slightly smaller font there. At L804, we need to be at 13,000 feet instead of 12,882. 12,882 has been computed by the VNAV. We'll set that at 13,000. Then we'll go to the next page. L805, we need to be at 12,000 feet. That overrides 11,957. And at L806, we need to be at 11,200. Slash 11,200. And the next waypoint is almost a mile out. We're going to catch the runway extension and the glide slope there. From there we'll glide at 3 degrees down onto the runway. And we'll set that. It's warning us that there's a steep descent on the way. Several steep descents.
Okay, so let's have a look and see how it works in real life. Here we are taking off.
V1, rotate. Positive rate.
Gear up. VNAV, LNAV, Autopilot. We bring this landing gear lever to the off position so the pump is not running during the flight. We have a speed restriction at L802 of 150 knots, and the VNAV has planned for 273 here. So we need to change that to 150 / 16,000. Instead of 273 / 16,000, we'll enter it here. And we'll hit exec. We'll remove the error messages and see how the waypoints on the next page show up. They do show up at 150. And I'm going to enter a different speed. I'll be taking over speed control before we get to RX07L, so we're okay. And we're approaching the Lilacs waypoint, at which we'll turn a few degrees to the right. We can see our top of descent has approached, so I'm going to reduce the minimum altitude on the MCP below the runway, which is not a good idea in practice, but for this exercise it should be good enough. If you look here, the autopilot is asking for some help with drag. So I'm going to give it some flight speed brake here. And generally that drag required warning there, it goes away when the autopilot no longer requires the drag. Now by LH02, I need to be at 150 knots, which is a pretty slow airspeed. I'll need flaps for that. I'll also set my landing gear out. Now this is a good time to note the altimeter setting for the airport, which is right here. And the altimeter setting is 2974. So come here. Trust me that that is set to 2974 once we take it off standard. And the transition altitude is very, very high here, so I'm not going to wait any longer. I'm going to switch it to 2974 right now. 2974 right there. LH02 is now 37.2 miles away, and we need to be at 150 knots at LH02, so I'm going to start reducing my speed here. In order to do that, I'm going to press speed intervention right here and reduce it. We'll start with 250 and watch my speed brakes there. I'm going to give it some speed brake. And we can see 250 has been recognized by the autopilot and it's now reducing speed. But it's gotten a little high in its attempt to reduce the speed. It's catching up here. It's just over 500 feet above the glide path or the vertical navigation profile. Before I do that, I'm going to bring the wheels out. I have 3 in the green here. I'm going to reduce to 140 and drop 30 degrees of flaps. And I will slow to, that should be 146. I've set the speed to 146 and it's going to be 139 when I come in for the landing. At this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and start the APU so that I can use the bleed air from the APU and shut off the bleed air from the engines to get more power available in case I need to do a missed approach. The APU bleed air should be effective below 17,000. We'll check. Let's see what the APU is doing here. The generator is on. I can see pressure here, duct pressure from the engines. And now if I turn the APU on here, there's going to be back pressure from the engine to the APU, which could blow the APU valve. So I'm going to shut off the engines and turn the APU bleed on. And yes, even though the altitude is high, I do see some duct pressure here. So we're good to go with APU bleed air, and we're not using any bleed air from the engines. That would be, yes, the cabin altitude warning here. I'll have to let it run. There's nothing I can do. You can see the cabin pressure here is approaching 10,000 feet. When we land, we'll be at 10,850. So the outside pressure and the inside pressure have to match, or you cannot open the door. The brakes here are required to be set to position 3. So I'll do that now. I'll set my landing lights on. My speed brakes are armed. And now we're heading for LH03 and descending to 14,500. Descents will be easy with this flap setting. But if the altimeter setting is not right at this airport, we're going to have a controlled flight into terrain unless I grab the wheel in time. So we're turning for the first of the 2 ridges. The autopilot has taken us just a little bit low, but it's catching up. It's getting back on the profile. Here comes the second of the two ridges. We can see the radio altimeter here telling us the terrain below is just over 2,000 feet. Now we'll be turning to runway heading, and I'm going to set 100 degrees, which is the missed approach heading. And we're heading for LH06, which should be roughly lined up with the runway. We're intercepting the runway extension.
And let's just say this was not my best landing, but I hope you'll like and subscribe anyway. Thank you.
300 approaching minimums. 200.